You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. On today's programme, the millions of homes at risk because of extreme weather events made worse through climate change. How more money for clean energy in developing countries could help slow global warming. And the campaigner who took on big banks over their financing of coal projects and won. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and meet those developing the solutions. Coming up, the simple switch, which could save more than 1 million tonnes of CO2. But first, more than 8 million homes could be lost every single year around the world because of extreme weather events made more likely because of climate change. Research from the charity Shelterbox and Northumbria University found that if these events continue to increase at existing rates, 167 million homes could be lost by 2040. That's the equivalent of every home in the UK being wiped out 6 times over. And looking specifically at the UK, according to the government, 5 million properties are at risk of flooding from rivers or the sea. With me now is Sarah Stricanthan, Chief Executive of Shelterbox. Hello to you, Sarah. Thanks very much for being with us. I mean, what those numbers do is set out in the clearest terms the human cost. But when you think of climate change, it's not always the first thing that springs to mind.
That's right, Sarah. It's often we focus on the natural world, and of course that's important, and animals are also helpless. But the reality is that we're forgetting that the impact of climate change has already arrived for many human beings and communities around the world. And that's where Shelterbox has been working after floods, droughts, and so many other weather-related emergencies that are human-centred. They're not natural disasters, they're human-created disasters.
The scale of the impact of this is often hard for us to get our head around, isn't it? Let's look at, on an individual level, at that human cost and some of the people that you've had to help.
Yes, the tragedy is that we can lose sight of individual stories in the numbers, especially when you get into the millions. For example, one lady whose story still sticks with me is Sagarika in India, who was devastated. Her family lost their home after Cyclone Amphan last year, and that reached winds of 185 miles an hour. And it meant that not only did she lose her home, she lost 2 bags of rice that they'd collected that was soaked. They lost their livelihood. And thanks to us, at least, they were able to have emergency shelter. But not only did she get that, she also had the need for permanent disaster resilient housing, which was simply something that the world is not paying enough attention about. The other issue is that she's been living there 25 years, and year on year, she has seen the weather worsening. And this is not normal. This is not natural. This is being caused by climate change, and it's tied to our emissions and our choices we make. So Sagarika's story is a tragedy. We were able to help her in the short term. Her long-term future is really dependent on the choices and actions we make to provide better futures and lower emissions all around the world.
Plenty for leaders to think about with the G7 summit and COP26 coming up. Sanj, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
In today's other climate news, world leaders are arriving this evening for the G7 summit in Cornwall. The event, promised to be the first carbon-neutral G7 meeting, will be attended by leaders from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK and the US. The group of 7 will discuss ways for their countries to tackle climate change. A large oil slick from the fire-damaged container ship that sunk off the coast of Sri Lanka has been photographed for the first time. Satellite images show evidence of oil seeping from the wrecked vessel, increasing fears of the environmental impact of the disaster. The ship was carrying hundreds of barrels of chemicals as well as plastic pellets when it caught fire last month. The oil and gas company Shell will accelerate its plans to cut carbon emissions. The announcement follows a ruling by a Dutch court last month that found the company had insufficient plans to meet climate goals. Chief Executive Ben van Beurden said that the oil giant will rise to the challenge, but added he felt disappointed that Shell was singled out. The UK's first fully electric coach, dubbed the Carbon Battle Bus, has been launched today. It marks the start of a zero-carbon tour across the UK, which aims to showcase climate-friendly initiatives and sustainable journeys. The trip will end at the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow in November. Halogen light bulb sales will end this September as part of the UK's wider efforts to tackle climate change. Halogen bulbs are far more energy intensive than LED alternatives, which last 5 times longer and produce the same amount of light, but use up to 80% less power. The shift is expected to cut CO2 emissions by 1.26 million tonnes, equivalent to removing 500,000 cars from UK roads. And landowners are being offered grants to create woodlands. The £15.9 million England Woodland Creation Offer can be used to cover all the costs of planting trees and maintaining woodlands for 10 years. The scheme aims to create woodlands with a range of tree species to help store carbon and tackle climate change, with extra money allocated for woods that the public can access. Let's take you over to our data dashboard now and look at the real-time power mix in Great Britain. At the moment, you can see that 29% of electricity is coming from fossil fuels, 49% from renewable sources and 22% from nuclear. And there's been huge investment in clean energy in the UK and other developed countries in recent years. But that isn't the case everywhere. A new report from the International Energy Agency says the world's climate future depends on developing economies transitioning to cleaner energy, and the investment to help them do so should be a top priority. Emerging and developing economies account for 2/3 of the world's population, but have only a fifth of global investment in clean energy. They currently heavily rely on fossil fuels for their power. If you have a look at the bottom of the chart, you can see that last year, the vast majority of energy in emerging and developing economies was produced by coal, oil or gas. In 2020, less than $150 billion was spent on clean energy investment in these countries. But for the world to reach its net zero targets, the IEA says this figure needs to increase by a factor of 7 to more than $1 trillion by 2030. Let's bring in Tony Tiu, CEO of Renewables Africa, who work with governments and businesses to install solar capacity. Hello to you, Tony. A big investment in the UK in renewables, but how easy is it to access that investment in the places where you work?
Well, I think it's quite difficult to access those investments because most of the time what we see is the investment goes into major economies, but when it comes to the emerging market, it's not that easy to get it for simple reason that investment, I would say investors are not maybe attracted enough by emerging market because of the perceived risk regarding the currency risk or maybe the political stability. So that's why we are seeing some issues with regard to emerging market and specifically Africa.
So not just financial hurdles, but political ones as well?
Yes, not financial, but also political. And I would add as well regulatory, because you need to have an environment that is conducive for renewable to happen. And I also wanted to say there is a divergence in terms of the vision. The way Africa sees the fight against climate change and the way partners of Africa will see that. So there is a disconnect there.
The IEA says there needs to be a massive increase in investment in clean energy by 2030. How likely is that to happen, do you think?
So there's a two-way to look at it. So if we're looking at the mindset that has driven us for the last 20 years or so, definitely I would say it's very unlikely to happen. However, if we're talking about the COVID spirit that has brought nations together and get them to spend trillions just to make sure that they can save the planet, it's definitely possible to do it within the next year or two, I think so. So that's what I would say.
And what's your message as G7 leaders get together this week then, Tony?
So the message would be, first of all, we need to agree on what is the vision that should be driving everybody. Because as I say, if there is a disconnect and people not living or not looking at the same direction, I'm more than certain that in 10 years' time, we're going to arrive. But the question is, are we going to all arrive at the same point? So the vision is important. And we need to have a vision that Africa share or emerging markets share and the vision that G7 share as well. In all of that about to save the planet. That's what I would say.
Tony, great to hear from you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, ahead of the G7 meeting later on this week and the COP26 summit in Glasgow in November, there have been renewed calls for banks to stop financing new coal projects. As we've been hearing, the fossil fuel remains the world's primary source of energy, especially in those developing countries. One person trying to change this is Lucy Pinson, whose activism successfully pressured banks and insurance companies in France to stop funding new coal projects and companies.
My name is Lucy Pinson. I am the founder and director of Reclaim Finance. I have been an activist for social justice and against human rights violations since the end of my high school. But it's when I joined social movements in Paris in 2011 that I really started working on the deeper structural causes of inequalities and on the links between social and environmental injustice. It's really about making sure that no more financing goes to the expansion of the coal industry. We really called all French banks to commit to stop providing direct financing to all coal mines or all coal plants, which is something we achieved in 2015, more or less. When we started campaigning on coal in 2013, coal wasn't such a big issue, and people didn't know in France that coal was such a big issue on climate and on people's life worldwide. And we really made sure that no banks, no French banks could go to COP21 without having a journalist asking them, have you stopped financing coal? We are planning some activities with our partners worldwide to make sure that these financial institutions clear their portfolio on the road to Glasgow.
Well, that's everything from us for today. Tomorrow, ahead of the G7 summit in Cornwall, find out the climate impact of a Cornish pasty. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.